On March 19, 2001, Durst rented a second apartment in New Orleans for a man named Michael Ogden. Now, once again, Durst assumed the disguise of a mute woman, this time using the identity of another person he had met named Diane Wynn. Now, Durst testified at his Galveston trial that he also rented the New Orleans apartment as a mute woman, but that his intention was to eventually live in Galveston under his real name once everything went away. Now, the New Orleans apartment, Mr. Durst is going to hear from him, and the evidence will present, was his escape plan in case he ever had to quickly flee Galveston. We talked about the Beatty story briefly before. The Beatty story was authored by Durst, and it's a cheat sheet designed to chronicle the information that prosecuting attorneys in Galveston would and would not be able to disprove. So the entries in the Beatty story reflect Durst's fear that he was about to be charged in connection with Kathie's disappearance. Now in Galveston, Morris Black, although cantankerous, would purchase out of his own money eyeglasses to hand out to those he felt were in need through a charity called the Jesse Tree. And this was Morris Black's kind of own idea. Now, the Jesse Tree was a faith-based organization in Galveston that was dedicated to providing services to different individuals who were in need. Now, during the summer of 2001, and Morris is going to be murdered, people's position, on September 28th. So we're now during the summer, we're a few months away from Morris being killed. During that summer, Morris became aware that Durst was from New York and that he had significant financial resources. So now he knows it's Robert Durst, and he knows he's from New York, and he knows he's got a lot of money. Ted Hanley ran the Jesse Tree charity. And at the time, the organization was trying to purchase a building, the charity, to further their services. He's going to testify that Morris told him that he, Morris, had been talking to someone who had a lot of money who might make the purchase of the building possible. The evidence is going to show that person Morris was referring to was Robert Durst. Now, Morris approached Durst with a request to fund the building purchase. In July 2001, at Morris's request, Durst, in an effort to determine whether Hanley's request was legitimate, disguised himself as a person in need and approached Hanley and asked him for $50 to get to Beaumont, Texas. It's a little bit confusing. So basically, Durst wants to figure out whether or not Hanley is legitimate. So Durst goes down there disguised as kind of a person down there, like a homeless person, and says, "Hey, will you give me $50? I need to get to Beaumont, Texas." That was apparently a test that Bob Durst wanted done, was doing. Meantime, when Morris's lease was up, their landlord, Klaus Dillman, you're going to hear, Klaus Dillman is very sick, might even have died by now. He's not going to testify. And in fact, he was not someone who was previously examined during these proceedings. However, he testified during the Galveston murder trial in 2003, and both sides have agreed that the admissible parts of his testimony can be read in. So when Morris' apartment was up, Klaus sent Morris a letter telling him, "You got to move out." When the letter arrived, Durst was not in Galveston. This is again according to Mr. Durst. Now, the evidence is going to further show that Morris was the kind of person that would yell at other people in the building to turn off your light because it was a joint electric bill. He was very cheap, and he had no problem telling people what he thought. And he was a pain, no question about it. And Klaus Dillman had decided, you know what, I don't want to deal with this guy. Now on July 25th, 2001, the TV show 2020 aired a nationwide episode on Kathie's disappearance. Mr. Durst was not in Galveston at the time. So meantime, what happened, even though he's living in Galveston, disguised as a mute woman, Dorothy Steiner, he's got the place in New Orleans where he's a mute woman, Diane Wynn, But he also will travel around to different places in the country under his own name. And meantime, back in Galveston, he starts appearing at the location, and he is identified as Dorothy Sayers' nephew. So Bob Durst is basically living two different lives at the Galveston apartment. One is when he is in drag and he's Dorothy Sayers, and the other is when he is Dorothy Sayers' nephew, which is himself without the real name. And then he will use phony names. He does not use Robert Durst. Okay? On July 25th, 2001, they aired this nationwide episode. In August of 2001, Durst returns to Galveston. And according to Durst, in the BD story, I believe, or maybe it's in a statement he's given, but you'll hear that evidence, Morris told him that he was being evicted by their landlord. Now, after the eviction notice, Morris was pressuring Durst, who he knew had a lot of money, to buy a house that they could live in together. And again, how do we know this information? We know it from Bob Durst.
And then he got a letter from the landlord that said, get out. And they have open houses all the time in Galveston. It's something people do. Houses turn over very infrequently. And we have been going to open houses for a while. And he had sort of made it known, well, if you buy this house, there'll be plenty of room for me. And this is true, there would have been plenty of room for him, except that personality takes up all of everything, and I didn't want him living with me. And I thought about buying a house there as a place to go sometime, but I wasn't going to live in Galveston full time if I was going to be Robert Durst.
Now, during this period of time, Durst was continuing to structure money. And the evidence is going to show this is in preparation for his plan to flee Galveston. During the trial in Galveston, Mr. Durst was asked, how much money had you accumulated by the third week of September of 2001? And his answer was $500,000 to $600,000. So Mr. Durst is preparing to flee Galveston, but there's a loose end, and his name is Morris Black. On September 25th, 2001, 3 days before Morris Black would be murdered, Mr. Durst began moving out of his Galveston apartment and checked into the very luxurious nearby San Luis resort.
And that was pretty much getting close to when I was leaving. And either right before that or right after that, I went and I took a room in the San Luis Hotel because there were some things I wanted to finish before I gave the apartment back to Klaus Dillman. I already told him I'm leaving.
So you came back to the apartment and Morris was in the apartment?
Yes, that was the end of it. I had already moved to the San Luis Hotel. I'd taken all my clothes and stuff out. I had a flight on Monday. I was going back to New York and do it. I'd already made plans. And he knew it. I wasn't keeping it a secret. I always thought the possibility I'm going to come back. I might buy a house. I might have a summer house here. But I'm leaving.
So the evidence is going to show that here we are, 3 days before Morris Black is going to die. And Bob Durst is saying that, one, Morris Black knows who he is, knows he's got a lot of money, knows that he is from New York, and circumstantially the evidence will demonstrate that he knows Bob Durst's situation. And there's another problem the evidence is going to show, is that Morris Black is pressuring Bob Durst to get a house with him. Mr. Durst, the evidence will show, it's not a secret that he's leaving. So he is about to leave, he's moving out, and Morris Black wants him to get a house. That's going to be the circumstances right before Morris Black is going to be murdered. September 28th, this is going to prove to be the last day of Morris Black's life. Now, Durst account,
Sorry to interrupt. He said murder. The jury found him innocent.
no, they found him not guilty.
Okay.
Not finding.
But not much difference.
Oh, it's different.
We object.
Oh, no.
But now, there he goes again, Judge.
This is a speaking objection, I don't allow them. So,
What about counsel addressing me, Your Honor?
no, counsel, you should not, Mr. Lewin, and nor should you address Mr. Lewin.
I didn't.
All right, all right. So, Mr. Durst was acquitted of murder in that case. He's no longer in jeopardy in that case. The facts of that case may be relevant in this trial in a different context. They may have a different meaning in the context of other evidence that the parties present. And so you will be allowed to consider that evidence. Mr. Lewin used the term murder, and this is an opening statement. This is not argument. This is not evidence. This is what Mr. Lewin is telling you he intends to prove. If he uses the term murder, that means he intends to prove that that incident was a murder. Whether or not it's a murder or it is not really the point. The point is that the facts of that incident may be relevant to this trial. You may continue.
What people intend to prove is that this was not accident, it was not self-defense, that Bob Durst killed Morris Black intentionally. There's going to be evidence that Mr. Durst was acquitted, found not guilty. He was not found innocent. It's not what jurors do. Jury made a determination that the evidence that was presented at Galveston at that trial did not meet the burden. We're going to be presenting evidence in this case, and we're going to be arguing that factually what happened was not self-defense or accident, that factually it was murder. But Mr. Durst is not on trial for that murder, and the judge will be instructing you as to how that evidence can be used. So when I say that he murdered Bob Durst, or he murdered Morris Black, I'm not telling you that the jury found that he murdered Morris Black. The jury acquitted him. I'm telling you what the evidence I'm going to present is going to demonstrate. So Durst's account at trial of what happened can actually be traced back to exactly what he wrote in the BD story prior to his testimony. Again, the BD story serves as a checklist of what he could and could not lie about. That's what the evidence is going to show. Not surprisingly, the testimony largely mirrored what he said in the BD story, and you're going to have that evidence, and I'm skipping through, I'm not going to read through it all right now. However, it will be impeached by Durst's prior and subsequent statements about it, the physical evidence relating to the case, and overall common sense. That's what evidence we will put on. Now, September 28th, Durst was still staying at the San Luis Resort. According to the BD story and his testimony, around 5:45 a.m., he drove his Honda CR-V to the B'nai Israel Temple and parked the car. The temple was about a mile from Durst's apartment at 2213 Avenue K. At around 6 a.m., after what Mr. Durst described as a short jog, he arrived at 2213 Avenue K. Durst allegedly entered his apartment and found Morris uninvited inside. This is what he says happened.
He was in the apartment. I could hear the TV from outside. Opened up the door, ready to start. Oh, and also, since I'd taken the key away, he must have made an extra key. And that worked through my mind right away. He's in the apartment. He made an extra key. Walk into the apartment. He's sitting at the table. There's a yellow thing on a sweater or whatever, jacket, on top of the table. And I'm, primed. Morris, get out of here, period. I'm leaving, get out. I don't ever want to see you again. He takes the gun out from under whatever the yellow thing is on the table. I grab him and the gun, and we fall down in the kitchen. The gun goes off and shoots him in the side of the face.
Now, the evidence is going to show that when you listen to Mr. Durst to that statement, Mr. Durst starts off and he says that opened up the door, ready to start yell, and then he stops and he says, "Oh, and also since I've taken the key away." The evidence is going to demonstrate that when Mr. Durst is telling this story to Mr. Jarecki, that he realizes as he's telling the story, wait a minute, I've already taken the key away. How does he get in there? And he quickly says, he must have made an extra key. He also, if you listen to the end of that exchange, the evidence is going to demonstrate, says that I grabbed him and the gun and we fall down in the kitchen. The gun goes off and shoots him in the side of the face. Mr. Durst is describing the gun as if it had a mind of its own and that the gun is shooting Morris. No one could stop it. Now, Durst was asked how he felt about what happened, because he's now described this horrible situation where Mr. Black, his friend, has allegedly tried to kill him. When you listen to the statement, there's something Mr. Durst isn't going to mention about how he felt.
And how did you feel when that happened?
Shocked, amazed, overwhelmed, astonished. My elbow hurt. Scared.
What the evidence going to show Mr. Durst didn't mention was sorry or horrified or mournful that his friend had just died. The evidence going to demonstrate that the reason Mr. Durst didn't voice those feelings is because he didn't have them. Now, Mr. Durst described his thoughts and feelings immediately of how he felt immediately after the shooting. And this is again, this is in the December 2010 interviews with Jarecki and Smoke.
And so suddenly that was it. He was dead.
Yes, he was dead.
And then, now you're in your apartment, Galveston,
Yeah,
Texas.
he's dead.
And you have this.
I sat down on the bed for hours trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
And then what went through your mind?
I can't go to the police. I can't go to the police. I can't go to the police. The police are going to want to investigate it and ask me a zillion questions. And from the outset, I'm going to say, well, my name is Robert Durst, and I rented this apartment disguised as a woman named Dorothy Siner. I mean, I could just picture myself going to the police precinct to report this. My name is Robert Durst. I rented this $300 a month apartment disguised as a woman named Dorothy Siner. My neighbor is lying on the kitchen floor with a bullet wound in his face. He's dead. The bullet came from my gun. Oh, and this is an accident. Oh, and by the way, I'm a rich guy from New York, and my first wife disappeared, and I was never charged, but there was lots of speculation that I did it. And they're going to arrest me. What else could they possibly do?
The next image is disturbing. I'm just going to give you a warning. On September 30th, 2001, a young boy fishing with his father discovered a human torso floating in Galveston Bay. Responded, and divers found garbage bags. Now, when we say divers, they weren't really divers. It's very shallow there, and they were basically just on their hands and knees. They weren't using scuba equipment and just gathering the evidence. You're going to hear a substantial amount of evidence that Mr. Durst picked a very bad place to dump the body because Galveston Bay is very shallow, and he put it in garbage bags which float, and that they didn't go anywhere. They came up to shore. So inside the garbage bags, investigators found body parts. Divers searched, again, these very shallow Galveston Bay for evidence. However, and very significantly, all the body parts were found except for Morris's head.
So what did you decide to do to get rid of the body?
Well, I decided I'd wait till night and I'd pick it up and carry it out of there. And then I realized,
I want to stop you. As you listen to the next clip, 1 second. Mr. Durst is going to describe what he did with the body. And as you're listening, very early he's going to say, and then I realized I wasn't picking up that body and carrying it anywhere because it was much, and then he hesitates. Please listen.
So what did you decide to do to get rid of the body?
well, I decided I'd wait till night and I'd pick it up and carry it out of there. And then I realized I wasn't picking up that body and carrying it anywhere because it was much, I mean, I wasn't strong enough to do that. I could drag it out, but I just couldn't see. I mean, I thought about putting it in a sleeping bag or something and then dragging the whole thing out, but good God, that's ridiculous.
So you decided instead?
I decided to, it wasn't until the next day when I can't just drag it out. I'm going to have to dismember this body.
Well, the evidence is going to show, circumstantially, that when he said, I'm not taking that body anywhere, that was a reference to Kathie Durst and how he had gotten rid of that body.
That's
The
all,
ev-
Judge, that's clearly an argument and conclusion and speculation.
Circumstantial, was it, I'm sorry, Your Honor?
I'll sustain it. Move on.
I asked the jury to be instructed in this regard.
It's a close call. I do think it relies on inference. It's technically, I would call it an argument, so I would sustain the objection, disregard it, please.
Now, as you listen to Mr. Durst's voice, the evidence is going to demonstrate, as he's describing this, it's as if he's constructing a shed or building something in the backyard. You don't hear any remorse, you don't hear any sorrow, you don't hear any pain, you don't hear any regret.
I went back and I realized I couldn't lift it, I couldn't drag it out, I was going to have to dismember it. And then I went to Chalmers Hardware Store, and now Morris had tools. He had saws and axes, a giant axe. I don't think he had a bow saw. Anyway, I went and bought a bow saw, I got a bunch of garbage bags and stuff like that, and went back to the house, and I'm sure I got more stoned and more drunk, and I dismembered the corpse, primarily with the axe, but some with the bow saw and I think another saw that Morris Black had. Took the body parts and put everything else there that was bloody, or whatever it was, that I ended up cleaning up the place with, put them in the garbage bags, and that night I put the garbage bags in my SUV and drove to find some place to dump the garbage bags. It immediately became obvious to me I'd dump them in the water, they'll sink, nobody will ever see them, the garbage bags are heavy, and that's what I did.
As you're listening and reviewing this evidence, really it will be played for you during the presentation of evidence at the actual trial after opening statement. The evidence is going to demonstrate that when Mr. Durst is talking about Morris Black, he doesn't refer to him as Morris. I couldn't lift it. I couldn't drag it out. I was going to have to dismember it. The evidence is going to show that Morris Black ceased being even a person to Bob Durst. In addition, as he's describing, if you review the evidence, as he's describing what he does, and he's talking about whether he used the giant axe or the saw, at one point he literally says, anyway, it's a very casual attitude that the evidence is going to demonstrate is not just inconsistent with an accidental killing or killing in self-defense. In any event. Mr. Durst was also asked about the manner in which he had dismembered the body. And he denied that it took any special experience. The way that he describes it, though, as you listen to him, he's very technical. You listen to what he has to say.
You know that the way the body was cut, somebody knew how to cut the joints.
You see, I don't know that. Subsequently, I've been told that a surgeon would cut up a body the same way you do a chicken. You go into the joint and you cut around the joint to get rid of all the ligaments, and then the thing comes out. You're not going to go and try to cut through the goddamn bone like I did, which was hard.
Well, you did a pretty good job. The thing that
Cutting through a bone is not easy with anything. I know that cutting up that body the way I was doing it was the hard way. The proper way is what a surgeon would do with a scalpel, and he would cut around the ligaments and then do it in the joint, not on the bone.
Would you agree, Bob, that somebody who could dismember somebody like that, you can understand why we would suspect you of having killed
That's
you?
what Kathie, Mother, and what Gilberti, and I'm sure the other ones think. I did to Kathie.
Now, the evidence is going to demonstrate that I couldn't get out even my sentence. All that I said was why we would suspect you of having killed. And Mr. Durst finished the sentence for me. He brought up Kathie. He brought up the dismemberment. He brought up people's suspicions. Now, during the 2010 interviews with Jarecki and Smerling, they also discussed what Bob Durst had done with Morris's body parts. And he explains exactly what happened. Now, at one point, no, it's the next slide.
Took the body parts and put everything else there that was bloody or whatever it was. And I ended up cleaning up the place with, put them in the garbage bags. And that night, I put the garbage bags in my SUV and drove to find some place to dump the garbage bags. It immediately became obvious to me I'd dump them in the water. They'll sink, nobody will have seen them, the garbage bags are heavy, and that's what I did.
So you drove to Galveston Bay.
Yeah, I drove around for a while because I had to get to some place on the bay where I could put the car near a pier or whatever you want to call it. I couldn't take it that way. I couldn't go to the beach and leave the car at the seawall and walk down the beach with my garbage bags. And besides that, it was a typical beach, but a particular Gulf beach where it went very gradually. It didn't get deep until you were way out. So I had to find a place along the bay, and I drove around for a while until I found one.
In the next clip, it's going to be slightly confusing. Mr. Durst, very briefly when he's talking, is going to mix up floating and sinking. So when you're listening, he's going to correct himself, but it's a little bit confusing.
So you basically just decided you were going to
I figured it was deep. Going to drop it, it's going to sink. Who cares where the tide is going? It's underwater, nobody's going to see it.
But the bags didn't sink.
No,
What happened?
they floated.
Because of the air that was in the bag?
Well, seemingly body parts float. Also, when I first, when people were first asking me, just because they're heavy doesn't mean they float. And I'm told that aircraft carriers don't float. I mean, this is all something I know, but I didn't think about that at all. Because it's heavy doesn't mean it's going to float. Trees are heavy, they don't float. They do float. It doesn't mean it's going to sink. Just because it's heavy doesn't mean it's going to sink.
Now, the evidence is going to show that much like the alibi with Bill Mayer, and much like numerous other situations in this case, that Mr. Durst did not spend much intellectual energy or capital trying to figure out how he was going to cover up his crime. But it had worked. This was 2001. He'd never been charged with Kathie. He'd gotten away with Susan. Now, in searching the garbage bags, investigators discovered a newspaper. So Bob Durst takes the body parts and he puts them in a bag with a newspaper that has the address of where they live. Now, they respond to that location and ultimately determine that the body parts inside the bag belong to Morris Black. Now, eventually, Mr. Durst is going to end up being confronted with, in essence, why would you leave a newspaper with the address? And Mr. Durst's response is going to be very revealing. His response is going to be, and I'll get to it in a second, to the effect of, well, it doesn't matter because they were never supposed to find the body parts anyway, so why does it matter if there's a bag in there? Now, investigators later discovered that Morris's neighbor, Dorothy Signer, was in fact Robert Durst. And they soon realized that it was Durst who had killed and dismembered Morris.
Now, if you were trying to get rid of the body in a way that wasn't going to be traceable back to you, why wouldn't you make sure that the garbage bags were empty before you put the body parts in them? Why would you have done something as careless as
I
leaving?
wasn't going to give the police the body parts. I mean, if they got the body parts, they'd know where he lived. I mean, the police weren't supposed to get the body parts. What difference did it make what was in the bags?
That wasn't the only thing he left in the bags. There was also a receipt from Chalmers Hardware Store. The receipt was for a purchase on September 28, 2001 at 12:17 p.m. The items purchased were trash bags and a drop cloth. Now, I want you to bear in mind that the evidence is going to show that the timing of what occurred, some of it is based on what Mr. Durst says, and some of it is based on what neighbors have said. And you're going to hear from those individuals. So investigators would ultimately learn that prior to going to the hardware store, Durst went to Bank of America to structure more cash. Now, he testified at his Galveston trial that by this date, again, he had structured between $500,000 and $600,000. He also, at his Galveston trial, described that it was his plan that he had formulated after Morris's death, what he intended to do. He said, I was going to make it appear that Morris Black had moved out of apartment K. So in essence, what he was going to do, never to come back again. The evidence is going to show it was a tried and true strategy, tried and true operation. Because he had done the same thing in 1982 with Kathie, and it had worked. At trial, Bob Durst testified that he decided to go back to 2213, that's where they lived, and take Morris's clothes and belongings and discard them. He basically was going to clean out the apartment. Again, the evidence is going to show he did the same thing with Kathie. He testified, I thought that if Klaus did not get the check on Monday, October the 1st, he would come over to the building. So, according to Mr. Durst's testimony, he's just had this horrible, unplanned, Morris Black has tried to kill him. He's had to now dismember the corpse, but he's thinking alertly and sharply enough that, you know what, it's almost October 1st, and I better get Klaus his rent or he's going to come over there. So at first I figured I would just fill in the check and mail it, but then I remembered the way Morris did the checks was certainly unique. So Bob Durst, the evidence is going to show, has the presence of mind in this state of whatever it was to remember, hey, Morris does his checks a certain way, and I better duplicate that. And in fact, at his trial, he referred to, you're going to get the testimony, he referred to his mental state after the killing as he was in a fugue state, didn't know what was going on. The evidence is going to show he knew what was going on well enough to do the things that we've just described. Now, investigators would later obtain surveillance video from First Convenience Bank. Now, this is located inside the Galveston Walmart. So, again, after Morris's killing, that same day, Bob Durst has the presence of mind to go to Walmart and to go get a money order to pay Morris's rent. He then mailed the money order to the landlord, Klaus Dillman. Now, investigators later learned that that evening, September 28th, Mr. Durst returned to the San Luis Resort. Now remember, according to his testimony, someone's just tried to kill him. Morris's body is just lying dead in his residence. The evidence will show that won't be the last time that happens. And he goes back to the resort, and the evidence will show that he is so disturbed over what's happened that he gets a haircut at the spa, and then he orders room service, and he remembers fried chicken, salad, turkey club. Should be chips, it says clips. Chips and a Guinness. The next day, according to Mr. Durst, he woke up, went to Morris' apartment, and executed his plan to make it appear that Morris had left town. He then returned to his own apartment, where he allegedly unsuccessfully tried to roll Morris up in the carpet. Remember, Morris was killed in Bob's apartment because Morris had copied a key and gotten back in there. He then makes the, he says, difficult decision to dismember Morris's body. Now, according to Bob Durst, he goes to Economy Liquor. He buys a fifth of Jack Daniels whiskey. Depending on how you do it, that's 21 to 32 shots of whiskey, and just about finishes the entire bottle before returning to Chalmers to buy more supplies. He then returned to his apartment, and apparently immune to the effects of this large amount of whiskey he just consumed, dismembers Morris' body with, he says, an axe and various saws. Now, around midnight, he says that he took those body parts, put them in garbage bags, threw them in the Honda CR-V, and dumped them into Galveston Bay. Now, we know that happened. Around noon, the next day, he returns to the body dump site, and he sees the bags are now floating near the water's edge. At 8 or 9 p.m., he again goes back to the site, and he sees police activity at the location. Well, he immediately turned around and returned to the San Luis Resort. The following day, October 1st, remember, although they are collecting Morris's body parts, it's very interesting. You're going to hear evidence that detectives went over to the location on October 1st, but they went there after Bob Durst had left. And he went back to collect the marijuana he had hidden in the freezer. Got to have priorities. He then fled to New Orleans. Now, to execute his plan, he's going to go live as Diane Wynn in that escape residence. Meanwhile, a few hours after Durst fled, investigators, they've now made the connection to the address, and they go over there. They respond to the location. They subsequently obtained a warrant, and they searched both apartment units. Now, although Bob Durst had cleaned both apartments, there was still some evidence of blood. They later searched the contents of the garbage cans that were behind the residence. So these are going to be like the garbage cans that go for not just Bob Durst, but everybody in that apartment. What do they find? They find a Ruger 22mm target pistol. Now, that's going to turn out to be the murder weapon. Bob Durst is going to deny ever having cleaned the gun. but there's no blood found anywhere on that weapon. Now, records revealed that Bob Durst had purchased that gun on August 30th, 2001, 28 days before